Welcome to the Life of Hair. Now in today's episode we've got a cracking technique that I think a lot of people need to know about, and it's a really good technique if you've got a situation like we have here where we've got a large regrowth and then we've got a large amount of blonde on the ends, almost half and half, 50-50, but doesn't want to be that blonde on the ends anymore but still wants to have blonde within the hair. Amelia needed dimension and she needed toning down a little bit, so we're going to do all of that in this particular technique. So what we've done, 4 quadrants, split it, and in this bottom section where there was not a lot of lightness, we're just going to take 3 large ribbon weave sections and apply our lightener to them and use our hands to blend up towards the root area as you've just seen. But as we travel through the sections, what we're going to discover is that we need to put dimension back into the ends. So as we split our section into 2, we're going to then add in our low light color, which is pretty much the same as the natural. In this particular instance, we're using a 7 golden beige tone to add that depth back into those ends and cover up some of that blonde. Now we don't need to pre-fill because we're using the gold, and that's going to give us a reasonably neutral natural result. Now with a technique like this, as you can see, you need to keep your hands very, very clean. You don't want to get the blonde on the dark and the dark on the blonde. Now in terms of coverings, then yes, you can cover as you go, and you'll see with my lightener, I do start to use foil to cover and make sure that the product doesn't dry out. You may have seen the video that I discussed about incubation. People think it creates heat. It doesn't create heat, foil, it just traps in the moisture and stops it drying out. And if it's right next to the scalp and you're doing highlights, then it will have some difference, but if it's off the scalp, it doesn't really make any difference at all. So when you're doing a technique like this, don't be fooled into thinking that you're creating heat. You're definitely not. You are definitely just stopping the product drying out, and that is one of the big things that stops bleach working over a long period of time, or one of the reasons it becomes inefficient is because it has dried out. So if you cover it, you'll get extra levels of lift based on the fact that it isn't drying out. Anyway, as we work through this technique, you'll see that I'm doing exactly the same thing and repeating the technique all the way through. It's incredibly simple, this technique, and so easy to do, and it's a fast technique, maximum 45 minutes to get the whole thing applied, even on thick hair like this. And it is quite thick hair, it may not seem it, but there's a large amount of density, and Amelia's got plenty of hair on her head. And in terms of the actual technique, I have talked about this particular technique several times before in other videos and used it in different contexts, but basically what you do is you apply lightener to kind of halfway down the hair, and then you freehand brush the lightener back up towards the root area to create a very nice diffusion. Once I've applied the foil though, I then go back in and I just apply a little bit more lightener, and that's to ensure that it doesn't dry out in the meantime. It's a very important step to go back and add that second lot of lightener to the hair to prevent it from drying whilst you're waiting for it to process. And you'll get such a nice clean lift if you do that little bit of extra work, and it really is worth your time, I can assure you of that. Now this technique, the beauty of this technique is that it repeats itself over and over again. As we work up the quadrant, we just repeat the technique until we get to the top of our section. So I will jump to the side sections in a minute and I'll show you how we work our way through there. But in the meantime, I'll talk about the versatility of this particular technique and how easy it is for you to implement this onto your day-to-day life. Because even if you just try it once and you kind of get the idea of blending that product with your hands up towards the root area, once you've got that concept, this technique really does work in many, many different facets. I use this in between foils, for example. Sometimes I'll put some foils in and I'll use this technique to add different types of dimension to within the hair. We see a lot more techniques these days that are a lot chunkier and heavier, but they don't come bang off the root. If it comes bang off the root, it's going to look very chunky and stripy, and we do not want that. So if you've got that diffusion coming down from the root area towards the end where the hair's a bit blonder, this technique is an absolute winner in my book. And you can also go back in and use your favorite root stretching, root drag techniques. You may have seen my previous videos on that particular technique to diffuse any of the roots, but you don't have to. And in this particular instance, I'm not going to do that. It's going to be perfectly blended without needing to go to that extra step of doing a root stretch to create that perfect blend. But whilst you're learning this technique, sometimes it can be advantageous to kind of go back and make sure that you take away any demarcation or extra heavy lines that you leave in the hair by accident because of your inexperience with the technique. But don't be afraid of the technique. Give it a go. Do it on your friend, do it on your cousin, do it on whoever, do it on a client that's experimental, and see how you get on with it. Because I know once you start using this technique, you'll see so many ways of using it. Now, one thing I hasten to add in this particular instance and this particular section you're seeing right now, and the reason I sort of stayed talking about it is that you can see how I've worked right up to that triangle section, and that is absolutely fine. We've got 3 sections here, we'll have 3 on the other side. What you need to make sure is on this top section is that they don't touch one another. So the far right hand side of this section is to the extreme of the triangle section. We want to make sure that we don't do exactly the same thing on the other section. So we've got 2 large pieces in the center back. That's the only thing to remember in this particular instance. But keeping your hands clean, working cleanly, guys. Don't get bits of color on places you didn't want it. As you go through the technique, keep wiping your hands, have that spare towel to hand. And as you work through and you make sure that you're taking each of your sections, working that product through, saturating the ends almost fully. And as you can see, the areas that I've already pre-lightened right down to the ends, I'm trying not to overlap that too much. In some instances, we're getting a bit of overlap, but not a huge amount. And one thing you can do with overlap, and it's something that's hard to see on these videos, but I pull the product off of the hair that I don't want to keep pre-lightening. So the less saturation, the quicker it will dry out, and the less it will damage that existing blonde hair. So that's why in that middle section, I then leave out the ends so we don't keep cooking that hair. Obviously, we want to keep Amelia's hair in the best possible condition as we work through. It's very simple with this particular technique as well, in terms of you part the hair into the most worn position, whether that's the middle or the side. If it's worn on the side a lot, then you work your way up to that side parting. If it's worn in the middle a lot, you work your way up to that middle parting. It's not rocket science, and all you need to do is confirm with the client where they wear their hair. And if they say they flip-flop their hair around a lot, then you just do it to the middle. Very, very simple to remember and easy to implement. So in this particular technique, what we're going to do is come back in a second and make sure that we rinse it all out, and we're going to tone it to a really nice, soft, warm shade. We're going to drop it down to a level 8/9. And I'll talk a little bit about the toner that we used at the end of the video. But it's really important to make sure that obviously you are aware of these techniques, and that you know exactly when and where to use them. And I think once you start to use them, you'll really kind of become very, very fond of them indeed. And you can see I'm in the parting section now, and I'm just taking 4 large weaves out of that section. There's only one thing you need to bear in mind here is what color do you want to be on the face. We wanted dark to be on the face, so you can see I've got the dark section from the front hairline, and I've weaved out behind it the lighter pieces because I didn't want to create a money piece. In this particular instance, we were anti-money piece for once. So we wanted it to be dark around the face, and we want the lightness to be behind it. So I'm going to show you the finished result in just a second, but we're going to work our way through this section before we do that, just so that you can see how you would work up towards that parting, because I think it's one of those areas on the head that lots of people get afraid of, especially with techniques like this. I hear people saying, I want to leave a veil, I want to leave a piece of hair to protect it as they work through their technique. Okay, ladies and gents, and here is the finished results. We toned it with a lovely level 8 that had a copper gold hue to it. We used half of the mixing ratio with that, and then we used a level 9 that was a natural neutral shade, just to give that kind of very nice warm golden hue to the blonde pieces. And you can see the techniques added dimension back into those ends where we had a very almost half and half dip dye effect previously. We've taken the lighter pieces up, we've taken the darker pieces down, we've created contrast and separation throughout, and I just love the simplicity and the ease of a technique that looks like you've done so much work to achieve this result. I hope you've enjoyed this episode today. If you have, then do me the massive favor of hitting that thumbs up button, leaving a comment down below, and I appreciate each and every one of you that stay to the end of these videos because it really does help. I'll see you in the next one.